the road several times and managed it one day, but couldn't manage it from then on, even though Bob had clearly put it in a very obvious location. I just want to say.
Is that our sign for the dig though? I don't recognize anything in the back.
So I think everybody here was at the dig this summer, right? I think maybe George, you didn't go out to the site, right? So, so the history of the site is that Beth Thomas, the Bristol and South Bristol town historian, had suggested that we might investigate a mid-19th century schoolhouse, school number 6, although there was some issue with that, which Ed spent quite a bit of time demonstrating his archival research skills and figuring out exactly which school it was. But anyway, it's one of these rural schools. It serviced a local group of people. There were quite a few in the area. And what I found so interesting when Ed kept sending me all this great information about these schools is that the schools were really like community centers. They weren't just a school. This was also a place where if there was going to be a meeting, that group of people would get together, whoever their children went to that particular school, the parents would meet at the schoolhouse and have meetings there. So it was much more than just a place where the kids, went for their education. The other thing that we learned in 1939, something very important happened in the United States. Anybody know what that was? I feel like I'm in class. In 1939, what happened to the little red schoolhouse in the United States in one fell swoop? End of schoolhouse.
They
That's
consolidated
when,
districts or something like that?
at least in New York State, that's when the schoolhouses were completely disbanded, and that's when you started to get the schools like we know today in 1 year. And so there were quite a few articles that we read that talked about the end of the schoolhouse, the sadness of the joy of community going into, knowing the teacher and knowing the classmates and traveling through your educational experience together. It was over, and there was quite a bit of sobbing in the papers over that. But they felt that it made more sense to consolidate their resources and, more importantly, to standardize educational programming throughout the state. And that was really the underlying reason for getting rid of those little schoolhouses. Now, do you have the standing structure picture? What's the next picture? Well, I'm just asking because I don't. Oh, that's not the standing schoolhouse. That's me and Dash. Dash is going. It's okay, sis. You're going to survive this day.
There are several gratuitous pictures of my daughter.
That is.
We all like that.
Beth and Alan and I drove around. We visited actually.
I do have it, and the next one is the history of the site, and that's where that picture is.
Okay. Beth and Alan and I drove around and we visited one other location or two other locations? Two other locations. And, as with any dig that the Morgan chapter does, we always think in terms of that access, ease of access for our membership. That's really a big deal, especially since, older people want to go out there too. And so one was very easy to access. The problem was it had a thick turf all over the schoolhouse foundation. So they were all 3 schoolhouses. And I just sat there and I thought, nope, this is a repetition of Belcher about to happen to me, and I am absolutely not doing it. It was gonna be too much energy to rip off that side. And then we visited another site, and that one was much more difficult to access, and so Beth showed us this site, and we thought, good location. The only thing that some of you may remember, and which I so aptly demonstrated the risks of one day, is that there was a low-lying fence that had been squashed down, and I spectacularly planted
I don't have a
my face.
picture of that.
And I think Bob had to be rushed to the hospital because he thought I was dead. It was my most glorious moment, but truly not funny at the time, but I was impressed at how soft the ground was. So, so for those who weren't there, that is one of the walls that I'm sitting on right there with Dash, explaining to him why he couldn't roam free. Next picture. So this, well, I can't even see, where is the site?
You gave me maps where it wasn't Oh.
Yeah,
Did
it's,
you know that I
something
need a
very
new
far.
prescription for my glasses?
Well, I think I know
Actually,
now.
like, go up there and look very closely, point again. Ed.
No, it's actually, it's north of,
Wiggle jiggle this.
It's-
Oh, no, I won't do it.
If you
Oh,
go
we
for
will.
Real, it's up in
It will.
here.
right, it's actually just off of the map.
Yeah.
That's the very top of the map. So it's just off right at that.
So we were a little confused about which school it was, and Ed, did quite a bit of research, and you did conclude it was school number 6, right, Ed?
I'm not sure about that.
I
I don't know if I got a number.
I know that that's what Beth had said. In the end, I feel like, I know Ed figured it out, but of course I don't have my notes here, and as you can see, Doug and I are well prepared. So, it's because it sits on the edge of a school district. That was part of the issue. The building itself, now do we have the actual standing structure? No, I want to just go to this. Alright, so this was one of the questions. Was this, and you sent me this picture, this was, yes, you did.
Oh, no, I know, I recall the picture, but
And we looked at that, and we just did not feel that that was our schoolhouse.
That's number 8.
because of our foundation that was
Right.
out here.
And Ed was trying to determine which schoolhouse, which number it actually was, because it was confused by the fact that there were actually 2 schoolhouse number 6s on the historic maps. And one was clearly an inscription typo, and that was why we were just really confused about which one it was. So,
But isn't this the one we're thinking is ours here, right?
but
Yeah, it is right
south
there.
of Smyth, or Smith,
Yeah.
I guess you could say. So that is definitely our schoolhouse there, we just are still a little squishy on if it's a number 6 or not. But it doesn't matter, look at, there's a sawmill up, this
I did find a
Yeah.
Smith's son that was a teacher. so-
Which was, what year were we out at the sawmill? That was,
I've got this number, I don't recall the
it
year.
was almost 8 or 10 years ago now, I think, right?
Oh, yes, the memory goes down. Okay, next slide.
That was in the fall.
Yes.
Alright, so where is the pink building, the standing structure?
That was, I don't have that.
I did give it to you though.
It wasn't in the
Yes, it
it
was.
wasn't in the shared folder.
Get me out of this thing. So what I wanna show you is what Beth,
You'll never find
intrigued-
it, though.
I absolutely will find it.
Will not.
I will, I'm gonna find it. Stop. No, we don't wanna move anything.
See how much fun we have.
Morning chapter, 2022, dig,
We'll just
dig.
deep archive this one.
I know I have the pictures somewhere back with photos, look at them.
Is that what you're looking
Imagine
for?
that. Yes, but I have one of those too.
Pass your phone around there.
Oh my God, just a minute, as they say, processing.
Well, I know the internet, so,
Yeah. Hello. You can yell at me later.
Is this what it looks like?
Yes.
Now, just a minute, I'm gonna show you the actual schoolhouse.
Those may not be cash because you're not on the internet because it's in your Dropbox.
It's like a
Oh my God,
Yeah.
Griffin.
Well,
Okay,
that
pass,
can
pass Ed's
try it.
phone around, I'll
Yeah.
just
It's
leave
going
this
around.
spot. I'll just, you'll all get to see the meeting building. So,
Yeah.
so one of the.
It's at the-
There was
So-
no pink
Girl
roll.
Scout
Right.
campus.
So what's coming
The
around
original
this
school,
phone
yes.
He doesn't.
is a picture
It's just up the
of
road
what
from.
Beth Thomas thinks is the original structure that sat on top of that foundation. And what,
Oh.
did I just mess you up? Oh my God, I'm so sorry. What she,
I'm gonna get you a pink photo.
what she, what she told us is that the building was sold, the town sold it. It was transferred to a property
You know how
that
they
is
have that
owned,
extra,
was owned
like,
by the Girl Scouts.
we
And
could
it
make
became
that
one of the dormitories for the Girl Scouts. So,
Right. Plus it doesn't
well,
seem-
Ed and I and Steve, one of the locals around Schoolhouse,
cute.
and Beth and I just drove right on up to that property. I was a little intimidated, to tell you the truth, and I'm like, what the hell, this is like a nice property, private. But no, Beth leads us up there.
You know?
We hop out of the car, and a man comes out and goes, can I help you? And I was
Potentially
like, oh,
the schoolhouse.
this is
Potentially the
nerve-wracking. But no, Ed went right up and chatted him up, and so did Beth, and we said, we wanna look at that pink building over there. And he knew all about the history of the building. And so Beth, it turns out, when she was a kid, had actually slept in that building when it was part of the Girl Scout camp. And then the camp was sold, and this guy, he has bought the entire property and they're turning it into like a little mini resort area. So we were able to go into the building. Do you know the inside of the building, Ed? Oh, Jesus. Yes, okay, other photo coming around, this is old tech. And what you're gonna notice in this photograph is where the fireplace is. You see the fireplace, it's up against the far wall. So in our photographs, can we go back to our slideshow, or did I totally screw this up?
No.
I totally screwed it up, I did, oh my God.
It's
Oh
good.
well, what can
We're all
I tell
good.
you?
No.
But when we were out at the site and we were doing the excavation, we found the platform that the wood burning stove had sat on, and it was not up against the far wall. It was about 3/4 of the way into the structure, right? About 3/4 of the way, and it sat sort of in the middle of the floor. And we found a piece of the cast iron stove that had been there. So when they moved the building, I guess when they wanted to make it turn into a dormitory, they needed to have the heating element on the back wall. And so that's when they redesigned the building. The belfry, or where the bell used to be rung, it's still there. Was the bell up there, Ed?
I did not see the bell, but the structure for hanging the bell is there.
Right, the
place where you
structure
just
for
go
hanging
and
the bell is.
Right.
So, when we went out to the site, the first thing we did is we cleared off the walls. And there were big branches and trunks of trees lying all over the place, and we threw them on top of where we're gonna dig this year. Yes!
One thing I wanted to mention to you, when I looked at some of the indoor photos that I took, the rope is up there that was, I think, attached to the bell.
That's right. Yeah, so, I mean, it was really cool getting in the building, we were able to take measurements off of them, I hope Ed has those because I do not. But knowing the engineer, I'm sure he has kept all of
Oh,
those
I know
notes.
about that one.
Better go back.
But, is there a better shot that shows the front of the building?
So did your measurements line
This
up?
I don't
This
have the
is
building
inside.
there.
No, I mean, the
Sure,
foundation.
we have all sorts of
Uh,
foundation
Okay,
photos.
so we're looking actually at the front of the building right there, and it's actually 2 rooms. So there's a small rectangular
in before.
anteroom, and then there's the actual schoolhouse, classroom. And so when we looked at the red building, there's no anteroom in the front. So they came along, they lifted the main schoolhouse, and must have taken that anteroom right off, and then they transported that, to the Girl Scout camp.
So when you measured the floor of the building and you measured this, did they coincide?
I wanna say roughly, because Ed and I'm not sure that Ed and I exactly remember.
I think this was just a little bit longer for some reason, but.
This is longer from, what I remember, it corresponded more towards this foundation. As you can see,
Yeah.
this extends out like
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
3 feet here and into the back. This, it could have been an anteroom, it could have been a porch, it could have been, who knows? But I think the building that you went and saw is
Right.
closer to this.
It sat on that. Now, you can't tell from this image, but if you were standing in that ante-chamber, we'll just call it, we'll be very
Cloakroom.
Egyptian right here. There actually were a couple of steps that led down into that cellar area. So I'm not quite sure what that means, if that was maybe deeper originally, because there were definitely two steps. Oh, maybe I'm confused. Are they up or down? Do you remember, Jimmy? There are 2
The
steps there.
steps were going up
They were
into the
going,
bigger room.
okay, so I'm
Yeah.
an idiot.
Yeah.
So they were going up, so and that would, I guess, make sense, because the floor joists would have sat,
Mhm.
you know, they would have come into the foundation there.
Windows.
Next. Oh, no, go back a minute.
Okay.
So, there were virtually no artifacts worth spitting at in this dig. There were bricks that came out of the platform, and the platform is right here for that wood burning stove. So there were some bricks that somebody had very crudely carved into a semicircular shape, and there were stones as well. There was a lot of, there were a lot of machine cut nails, and there was some window glass, and there was mortar. The stones originally would not have been mortared. My guess is they would have been dry laid, because the building was put up in 1839. And then I guess because things started to jiggle and wiggle, they came along and they slapped some mortar in between, which, you know, if you don't have the right chemical composition, and stuff never sticks. It just falls right off. So they had problems with that. But right here, in the front right corner, closest to us, that's where we found the richest materials. And this was Jamie's pit. Jamie had the luck of everybody on the site. She found a lot of the goodies that came out of there. And so they definitely were dumping their refuse right there. On the other side, to the left of that anteroom, or whatever you wanna call it, we put a lot of junk. You can just see it sort of, that right here's a log, we got another one right there. There was a course of pavers, like 3 foot by 3 foot a space, and another course of single layer pavers right there. And they were odd, we documented them, but I think that that's the boys' privy, and that's the girls' privy, and of course, we dumped all of that stuff right on top of them. So that's where we're gonna go and look this year. We're gonna go dig the privies, because that's where they are. That's the best stuff. The privies always have the best stuff, Barb. Trust me, it'll be fine. Wear gloves if you
Bring
feel a
your
little
5 gallon
anxious about it.
pails. Soil
Anything
for
that's
your
dropped
hair.
in there has a nice soft landing, so.
That's right, perfectly preserved.
Good gardening soil.
There you go.
Hey, Sissie,
Yeah.
go back just for a second. So on that old schoolhouse when we went to the Girl Scouts,
Yeah,
we found a platform in front of the schoolhouse right about here for the door going in.
yeah.
And I don't know if the picture that went around showed this huge door going out to here, but that's because they cut that
Well,
out
they
wider
cut it out.
to use.
Remember, we saw they had actually cut into the original framing, so.
So they might have came out here and a step out to that way and around.
There was a railing, I don't remember where we found it. I don't know if it's this pink tag thing over here. There was a railing, I have it in the office.
Yeah,
I don't know where it came from, but definitely, there was a railing that was used for one of the entrances. Okay. I don't know what's happening here.
this is the excavation of the stove pit in the center of the building, and then one of the first test pits off to the back, left corner there. Basically didn't come up with anything in that corner, but the area immediately to the left would be where you suspect the privies are, and where it looks like there's, you know, almost a side door step, like it looks wide and even enough, like they may have been able to have another door there or some sort of side entry, but that would certainly make sense for the
So-
privies to be located there.
In keeping with that thought, we actually looked to see if there was any evidence of an opening on that side of the building. There's none. It was a solid wall. And on the other side, that's where the windows were, right, Ed? The windows
Correct.
were only on what would have been, I'm confused with my orientation here,
It'd be the west side. That's,
on the road
that's the
side.
east wall there. Road side is west side.
All right,
Yeah.
so the road is to the west, there's a solid wall on the east, and if you had the privies on that side, it makes sense that you wouldn't have had any windows there, at least to me, because of, well, you know,
They're
the,
privies.
yeah, next. Oh, there's one of my students, Kirsten, who actually came every day. And there she is again, demonstrating, I know how to put that line level on.
And that's the part of the stove platform that they're excavating around. This was the second unit, I think, that we did around that, so.
Yeah, so I don't know if any of you have been into any of the old schoolhouses that they take kids to in elementary school, but when you go into them, a lot of times the stove is about 2/3 of the way into the room, and it sits in the middle. So that is, you know, classic. And look, we don't notice people. We're having a break at this point and enjoying ourselves.
I did try to put in a lot of people pictures.
I see that. There's Bruce. He's a one-man screen over there.
Mm-hmm.
We put in, I think, 5 units altogether. 4, 5. And really, the only one that was productive was yours, Jamie. It's not to say that there wasn't stuff that came out of the other units, but it was mainly architectural stuff.
Right, the stove platform itself is interesting, but yeah, no artifacts to show for that.
Yeah. We have the door for the stove. That's about it.
Yes.
Or Kirsten. Yeah.
Kirsten muscled her way into most of the pictures.
We do have artifact shots, right? Are you kidding me? I gave you a folder, put all that stuff in a folder. Yeah.
Well, we have Mom brought the drawing and the actual,
And the
Yeah.
artifact, okay.
and the artifact.
So you have
The only
no
other
artifacts.
the only other artifact was one bead photo.
There was a square cut, a bottle, a little base of the bottle, there were some slate pencils, there were some buttons, there was
Pencil
a square
slate.
bit.
In the folder you, no.
Yeah, in the folder, there should have been, I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm merely
Look.
saying that there was.
There's the one.
I don't remember that.
We did the school teacher lying there on the
That's
grave.
it.
That's,
I
the
don't
reason you
remember.
don't remember it is why it's so funny.
One thing I'll say about the school teacher, one of the entries that, Ed found out about one of the school teachers is that he was also a farmer. So he was teaching, but he was also farming.
That makes a lot of sense.
But the community paid for the school teacher, so if there wasn't enough income for the teacher, then, I guess they did their own thing. I do know that at Burning Springs, at the Chapman House, which is one of the sites that we excavated, there was an entry for a school teacher who was there on Christmas Day. And from that, we learned that the school teacher would stay 2 weeks with a family. Every 2 weeks, he moved to a different family who had kids at the school. But that was not what was going on at this particular school. Hello.
Nice.
I didn't leave you out.
It's a nice little site, it's very compact, it's easy to manage. The thing that we would have liked would have been to have more interesting artifacts come out of it, but we were clearly looking in the wrong place, except for Danny's unit. Otherwise, we are pretty sure they're under those logs over there.
And that was the step area we were talking about.
Yeah,
But,
so
you know,
there's one of the.
If the door came out and went off to the side, you laid out, you had the building to your left, so you take your crap and threw it to the right where our pit was.
Yeah, so I want you to look at this picture, Ed, because that's a sill for going up into the schoolhouse proper. So I know what you said about the door possibly on the right, but you know, in terms of the entrance into the main schoolroom, but here it's clearly positioned in the center. So it doesn't
Right
mean
here.
that they
Yeah.
didn't change it over time, but here we have, you know.
Well, either way, you're still, if you're gonna toss something from the doorway,
No, I agree with the
it goes
tossing. Look out the
either
window.
way.
Well, it's also towards the road. I think people would have just naturally kind of.
And do we know if the road
Towards
moved
it.
at all, or was that, is
The-
the road where the road
It-
was, or have they moved the road at all?
The road has not been moved.
I
Okay,
think it's pretty
pretty
close to
original,
exactly.
okay.
what it was, yeah.
But we
They
did
never
wonder how they removed the schoolhouse from the location, because we looked at the trees, these trees that you see in this image, they look very small. But some of the trees that are around the schoolhouse are good, well, they're a good 16, 18 inches in diameter. So, if the schoolhouse was moved in the early 60s, it just seemed to me, I mean, I shouldn't even speak because I'm not an arborist, but it just seemed to me that, I don't know if those trees are older than, you know, if they predate the movement of the schoolhouse, and then we were trying to imagine how you would back up a flatbed, you know what I mean, to get it off the foundation. And the most obvious location, because there's a ravine just beyond, where they're digging up, there's a deep ravine. Now, I think Beth may have said that they put the ravine in because of drainage issues, so it could be a new ravine, I don't know. That would have, but for the ravine, it makes more sense to have gone that way with the schoolhouse, but I don't know. A mystery for sure. So no artifact shots. I'm gonna just scream. Because there were quite a few artifacts, but, oh well, what can I tell you?
I didn't have that. Well,
I
I mean, if
know.
I,
It's my fault, I have too many things going on right now, I'm spinning too many plates, and I should have made sure they were all in there, but, oh well.
it's.
Is this our last image?
Is
Okay.
there more dog photos?
Well, that's a pretty good shot right there, that's
Yeah,
Dash.
pretty good one,
Dash basically kind of felt like this was his day.
yeah. Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
Ran the whole
He's a very
thing?
good boy.
He brought me an artifact, actually.
Oh, well.
So,
Did he?
Yeah.
A
brought me
bone?
deer.
Bone?
Something in
Yeah,
bone?
Yeah,
He brought me a deer bone, yes.
He did.
smart, yeah.
In terms of the artifacts that were nice, we had an artifact that was the keyhole, obviously for the front door.
Do you have the drawing?
We also
Yes.
had some artifacts that related to educational activities. So we had a piece from a quill, so a quill and ink pen. We had part of, so we had some slate pencils, we also had a pencil, a real pencil and a cell. There were a few beads, there were some buttons. But unfortunately, I didn't check the folder I gave them, so we don't have those images. Oops.
So Mom's drawing
Pull it out.
the keyhole for us.
Oh, cool.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
This is the
And when did you say they moved the building?
in the 1960s. It was sold, a few years after the schools were consolidated into a school district. It turns out that the town, nobody really quite knew who owned the property, because the property seemed to sit on someone named Smith's property, but it turns out that it's actually a property owned by the town itself. So when we wanted to do the excavation, Beth simply asked the town, and they were thrilled, they said, okay, that's fine. The schoolhouses are interesting just because you can just imagine that the quality of the education depended on a number of factors. The skill of the educator, they handled multiple years of education, but also the money that the families had. The wealthier the family, the more you can imagine that they would be able to pay the school teacher. But I don't know, it would be interesting to see. My dad actually went to school in a one-room schoolhouse out in Texas. He tells me he walked through the snow in his bare feet, it was 5 miles away. Okay, maybe it's true, I don't know, I don't think so, because the town is only actually 2 miles from our farm, so I don't know about that.
How much snow did they have?
It does snow in Texas, I just want to say for the record, usually it melts.
Yeah,
dry.
Nice drawing.
But my father went through his entire educational, experience in that schoolhouse. And when he was in his early 80s, there were 6 high school graduates still alive from that schoolhouse. And like here, all of the schools are consolidated into these school districts. But my
Yeah.
parents were out
It's
there,
a shame.
and they had a big celebration at the school.
With
My
door.
dad and his
Door.
5 classmates.
Keyhole.
Yeah, keyhole door, yeah.
But he, I will just say, my father was a very intelligent man and rose to great heights in his career. But his spelling was absolutely atrocious. I mean, I'm like, Dad, did you have spelling? Because it doesn't seem like you know how to spell these words too well. He's like, well, thank God for Google. And I'm like, okay.
Spell check.
But it would be interesting just to be able to talk to people who actually attended school in one of these schoolhouses. Probably getting a little late.
If you really wanna do that around June
You
sixth,
go to one of
we
those?
have,
Did you go to one of those?
we have a meeting in
Old
Bristol.
Bristol?
he's,
Yeah, yeah.
he's
Look
two.
like the one-
Right, exactly.
Really? That would be
Your father and I are nearly
No,
the same
that's
thing. George, how old
I'll let
is
you know next.
June sixth.
I'm guessing.
He's 72 now.
So Alan just said that they're gonna have, they're having, every year they do this thing where they invite people who attended the
Congratulations.
schoolhouse to
Oh, wow.
to a meeting. That would be great.
I just know he's
Yeah.
78. What is he?
72. I thought you were closer to me.
You did
Yeah.
not?
Yeah.
I did.
You did
I will
not?
be.
I might
No, no,
have
you're
very
77.
put those images
No,
in the
yeah, no,
phone, but
yeah.
apparently.
Our grandmother went to.
So you want to-
77 or 78.
One where
Yeah.
it's,
Oh, she's a young. I don't remember what age she is.
it's where,
Bob was.
My mom.
Oh, Bob was there. She's the.
My mom's cousin.
you can tell what it is, cause they have granaries all around it.
Yeah, she's the youngest girl. So-
Farmers.
And
they-
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
It goes from, well,
Maybe
65 to
one
now.
room.
Adele.
You see the cast iron stove,
So,
sort of in the
partway
center
down.
of the back.
Yeah, you're 77 or 78. You're born,
This one is-
you're born in 44.
It's not House Farms,
Give you a little
and they have
more
all the
with the
red
last
barn, the little white
And I
people
showed her
up in the
pictures
windows
of
and across the street from that is the one.
And they
But it's got a lot of granaries on it, so you don't really notice it too much.
I think my mom
So
was
that's
born
what I
in
mean.
47.
I would say it had to be mostly grades because
Sissies right.
I can't keep track,
There
it's
was
my
always,
calendar.
whoever ran out, whoever got too much coal in the recycle house
Yeah, right now,
was.
I'm moving at some point. I moved back from my townhouse.
so that must have been some schoolhouse.
And now I'm trying to figure out if I'm gonna stay on this company and maybe move to Texas. I'm not sure.
That much thought.
But it's looking close to like I'm staying here.
So
I'm
there's
just trying to
so
move professional services.
picture as the kids.
IT
Sitting in
consultant.
school.
We're not drenched out.
And then,
So
you
it's
know,
probably
remember,
more
us
like
talked about
Yeah, so staying around here, getting a,
stove was,
getting another townhouse.
the room was cold some days.
Since my dad's a lot better.
Days and story time, 4 years
You're
ago.
a lot better now than you were,
Boots
so
up around
that's why.
cast iron
I'm
stoves.
moved out again.
You don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
That's about all.
Anybody have any questions for us?
Go for it. Yeah.
I have a question, yeah.
I know,
Is anybody else, am I interrupting? Because
high school.
we're talking over
Go
you.
right ahead.
So the executive director.
I just wondered, what is your aim for this summer then? You talked about the printers.
High school.
Are you trying to,
Usually it's.
is the ultimate aim to, figure out what were the structures like? Why would there be two, you know, an anteroom, is that an old cloakroom or?
That's all I guess.
That's your guess, yeah. I mean, these old schools all have a little cloakroom.
Not all of them.
But this looks a little bit too big to me.
That's just a stateroom.
Yes.
Yeah.
The one that's.
Well, it's not very big.
Has a little small.
It's probably,
Right, exactly.
it might be
First I would think so.
6 feet by 8.
6 by 8 is what I would say.
It's not big, I mean, it's like this,
Mhm.
you know? And if you have 10 kids coming in, maybe 12, that's plenty big for them to be very comfortable in the winter.
Yeah.
What we wanna do is recover some material culture that relates to
The process.
the time that the school is in operation, cause we know when the school closes, I think before it's actually sold off, there's somebody who lives there. I think there's already somebody who's moved in and turned it into a home. So it is a question whether, you know, the stuff that we found in the corner, it looks like it would be classic